He wrote the rule, turn back by 2 p.m. On May 10th, he broke it. Rob Hall waited high for a client as time, oxygen, and weather ran out. By 4:43 the next morning, he was still there, alive and calling down. What kept him from moving? It began hours earlier with one delay he wouldn't walk past. Rob Hall built his reputation on order. He wasn't the loudest climber or the flashiest. He was organized, precise, and calm. Years earlier, he and Gary Ball proved they could plan and execute complex climbs on a tight schedule. That discipline turned into a business model. Adventure consultants. Pay for a professional expedition, and you'd get guides who set limits and kept them. The idea was simple. If you protect time, oxygen, and daylight, you multiply the odds of everyone walking back into base camp. He drilled the same message each season. Move early. Move efficiently. Don't waste steps or words. Watch the clock. And when the agreed time arrives, turn around, no matter how close the top feels. A hard turnaround was not a slogan. It was an operating rule. It kept people from gambling at the worst possible altitude. Clients bought into that promise because it created a clear line between ambition and risk. The mountain could throw surprises, but the plan would hold if the plan wasn't bent. On May 10th, the plan began to bend. Several teams launched from Camp 4 in the dark, aiming for a clean ascent and a daylight return. The route looked routine on paper, but when climbers reached the balcony, the fixed lines weren't ready. People bunched up. Minutes turned into long waits while guides set ropes at high altitude. Oxygen bled. Bodies cooled. Time that should have been used for climbing was used for standing. Farther up, another delay at the Hillary Step. One line, many climbers, more waiting while rope work continued. Each pause pushed the day later. Every delay cut into their margin for weather and oxygen reserves. It didn't look dramatic in the moment. It looked like a crowd control problem. But high on Everest, crowd control is survival. The window tightened. The rule grew more important, not less. As the afternoon wore on, Rob faced a choice. Enforce the turnaround as planned, or give a little more time and try to land a successful summit for clients who had trained and paid and waited. He had made this call before and often chose safety. But this day was different because of one client in particular. Doug Hansen had turned around the year before. He came back because he and Rob both believed he could finish the job. It wasn't a casual relationship. Rob knew Doug's history, his determination, and what the summit would mean to him. By the time that mattered most, Doug was behind. Rob waited high on the ridge. The 2 p.m. window slid by. The safe daylight cushion thinned. A strict reading of the rules said it was time to go down. Rob didn't leave. Remaining with a struggling client fits the guide's instinct to protect. The calculation was that a short push could still work, that the weather might hold, that they could make the top and return with enough oxygen to step through the bottlenecks again. This wasn't recklessness. It was a judgment call driven by loyalty, recent delays, and the belief that a narrow chance was still a real one. It set the next links of the chain. The higher they stayed, the less room they had for error. Oxygen logistics now mattered more than any speech about rules. Somewhere near the South Summit, equipment issues and mixed messages began to cut into Rob's options. A regulator iced. He worked to clear it. Radio chatter about oxygen caches became confused. Reports filtered in that certain bottles were empty. Hypoxia scrambles memory and speech, so small errors become real problems. Time used to check gear was time not used to descend. Those minutes mattered. The ridgeline is not a forgiving place. At that altitude, a climber without clear oxygen support moves slowly, thinks slowly, and makes mistakes. Even a short stop can turn into a long one. Rob kept communicating, trying to manage the situation, but the day was slipping past any clean solution. The storm line built. The temperature dropped. The route behind them was no longer a simple retreat. It was a path through darkness and worsening wind with a team that had already burned extra hours. Night arrived on the ridge. Visibility collapsed. It was the moment when the turnaround rule is supposed to prevent exposure and confusion. Instead, they were still up high, struggling with oxygen and time. Rob stayed with Doug. Another guide climbed to assist and did not return. Reports from other parts of the mountain showed chaos as well. Climbers lost in the dark, rescues underway, calls for help. No one had spare strength for a clean, high-altitude retrieval above the south summit. The situation was now measured in endurance, not strategy. At 4:43 a.m. on May 11th, Rob's voice reached base camp. He said he was on the south summit. He was alive. He had frostbite. He described Doug as gone. Later that morning, he managed to clear his oxygen mask and get it working, but his hands and feet were no longer useful. He couldn't move on his own. He asked for help to come up from below. The people listening knew exactly where he was and what that meant. Reaching him required climbing into the worst part of the storm through steep ground and thin air, with guides who had already spent the night saving others at lower elevations. They tried to plan options. Could anyone push that high safely? Could he move even a short distance to meet a rescue coming up? The storm said no. The cold said no. The ridge said no. The margin for Plan B had been spent the day before on delays and waiting. A rescue above the south summit in those conditions was not a late call. It was an impossibility. Rob stayed on the radio. He conserved energy. He stayed calm. He kept talking when he could because that was all he had left to manage. Communication shifted from logistics to connection. Base camp patched a call through to his wife. He told her he loved her. He asked her to sleep. He said goodbye. These were not the lines of a legend. They were the lines of a person who understood the facts and kept his voice steady for the people who mattered most. Even near the end, he stayed who he was, controlled, direct, and protective. In the days that followed, teams higher on the mountain confirmed what everyone already feared. Members of the IMAX crew, who had delayed their own project to assist where they could, found Rob near the south summit. There was no safe way to bring him down. His position, the terrain, and the conditions made any retrieval too dangerous. His family asked that he be left where he was. That is where he remains. What do we do with the choice he made? It's easy to say, follow the rule, from sea level. It's harder when the client who trusted you is close to the goal, when delays not of your making have stacked the day against you, and when the mountain's traffic turned a plan into a tangle. Rob's call to stay with Doug wasn't casual. It came from the core of his job: protect the person in front of you. He believed he could still make the plan work enough to get them down. He believed the delays could be absorbed with careful movement and steady management. He was wrong about the margin, not about the purpose. Some point to pressure. Commercial expeditions bring expectations. Clients invest money and years of preparation. The guide carries those hopes. The competition among outfits can create an unspoken drive to deliver summits. Did that influence Rob? Possibly. But reducing his decision to business ignores the other fact. He had a long record of turning people around when it was necessary. He wasn't new to hard calls. He wasn't casual with risk. This was not a pattern. It was a single day where the system broke down at several points, and he tried to bridge the gaps with loyalty and time he didn't have. Others focus on rope management and route logistics. If the fixed lines had been in at the balcony and the Hillary step on time, the crowding would have eased. The window would have widened. The 2 p.m. target would not have been a trap. The summit could have happened earlier. The descent could have started with sunlight to spare. That's not hindsight bias. It's a straightforward chain. Delays breed exposure. Exposure breeds accidents. Rob understood that better than anyone. He used rules to prevent exactly this chain. The delays erased his best tools. Oxygen planning also mattered. At that height, confusion about caches and pressure settings isn't a minor annoyance. It's decisive. Misread bottles, iced regulators, and broken communication cost time and awareness. Rob handled technical problems many times in his career. On this day, each fix took place inside a shrinking window. The fixes worked, but too late to change the bigger picture. He got his mask flowing again. His hands and feet were past the point where it mattered. There is a reason climbers still talk about his final radio calls. They aren't dramatic, they're composed. He acknowledged facts without panic. He never blamed. He gave his team the information they needed, and he used his last clear minutes to make sure his wife heard his voice. That is leadership of a different kind. No hero lines, no big speech. Just a steady tone that says, "I know where I am. I know what this means. Take care of each other. What changed because of that day? Guiding outfits tightened procedures around rope fixing and summit day coordination. Many became stricter about launch times and queue management at bottlenecks. Radios and oxygen logistics got more scrutiny at every stage. Turnaround windows hardened. Teams discussed traffic plans with more detail and set clearer expectations about what too late means before anyone left Camp 4. People study Rob's 1996 season, not to argue over gossip, but to extract lessons about how fast a modern expedition can lose its safety margin when small delays combine. Rob was honored at home for courage and service. That recognition reflects more than the last 24 hours of his life. It speaks to years of careful guiding, to the clients who returned safely because he stood firm, and to the systems he helped build. Ask veterans of the mountain about him, and they will talk about trust. They will talk about the way he handled risk and responsibility. They will also say that, on one day in May, he failed his own rule in the most human way possible, by choosing the person in front of him over the plan that protects the many. Does that make him less of a leader or more of one? It depends on what you think a guide's first duty is at the highest altitude on Earth. If the answer is the rule, then the verdict is straightforward. If the answer is the person, the verdict changes. Most guides will say it's both, and that the art is keeping those duties aligned. So, how did Rob Hall die on Everest? Not because he didn't know better. He knew better than almost anyone. Not because he chased glory. He'd already stood on that summit several times. He died because small delays and equipment problems erased his buffer, because a storm cut off the exit, and because he chose to stay with a client instead of retreating alone. It is a hard sequence to accept, because it shows how a leader can do almost everything right and still end up with no viable move. That leaves a final question for you. If you were the one with the rulebook and the client who had tried before, would you have turned them at the line and walked down in daylight? Or would you have waited a little longer because you believed they could do it? There isn't an easy answer. That's why his story still matters.